Finding Blake Chester's, the next camp east of Segedunum in North Shields, by Lewin Hanratty and Gary Holland, 3rd edition, published by penbal.uk. Background. It is widely agreed that Hadrian's Wall terminated at Segedunum in Wallsend. What is more uncertain is what constituted the frontier to the east of Segedunum, where for several miles the Tyne continues on to Tynemouth. The Venerable Bede twice wrote of a wall from sea to sea, and other scholars such as Leland and Nennius reiterate this idea. Similarly, the Gough map, one of the earliest maps of Britain, shows the wall drawn all the way to the coast at Tynemouth. It is worth noting that Bede was from Jarrow, just across the water from Wallsend. He stayed there all of his life, and if anyone would have known the true extent of the wall, it would have been him. These sources may be inaccurate in asserting the existence of a stone wall, but what of a series of earth ramparts, or simply camps themselves which were present on the frontier following the building of the main wall? To this end, the antiquary John Brand, taking the lead from the early antiquary Camden, wrote, quote, "Tynemouth was called by the Britons Penbal Crag, i.e. the head of the rampire on the rock, from whence it has been inserted that if the Roman wall did not reach as far as this place, the fosse certainly did." End quote. John Brand, The History and Antiquities of the Town and County of Newcastle, 1789. The fosse is the rock dyke or ditch which runs north of the river and on which Tynemouth village is built. This sill and ditch was conflated with the vallum, see Hutton's Severus's ditch. The idea of an earthen rampart, natural or reinforced, extending east from Wallsend was articulated in more depth by John Hodgson in the inaugural journal of the Society of Antiquaries of Newcastle upon Tyne. Quote, "Why, therefore, are we to conclude that the security of the east coast was not an object of the first importance to them, or that they would neglect it? But that they did extend their communications beyond the station at Wallsend is a fact of which, fortunately, more convincing proofs than mere conjecture evince the truth. At Churton may yet be traced the form of a Roman station known by the name of Blake Chester's, a name sufficiently expressive of its origin. In the neighbouring fields, too, coins have been found at various times, and I am told by good authority that several squares and oblongs extending from West Churton to Tynemouth may yet be traced. Supported by these facts, the conjecture of a fort having existed at Tynemouth amounts almost to certainty." End quote. Archaeologia Aeliana, Volume 1, page 235, 1882. While the historian Collingwood Bruce, in his book The Roman Wall, 1851, wrote, quote, "The only trace of the northern division of the station that remains consists of the road which has apparently led from Segedunum to the outposts at Blake Chester's and Tynemouth. This causeway extends from the station to the north of the Shields Railway. It is formed by a mass of rubble about 2 feet deep and is 11 yards wide. It cannot be ploughed, and nothing that requires any depth of earth will grow upon it." End quote. Some speculation has surrounded the whereabouts of a Roman camp in North Shields. One common opinion is that the area at Camp Terrace may be the location, although no conclusive evidence has been found. This paper describes another site which is noteworthy and requires serious consideration. Images. The general route of the fosse or ridge, more or less along the course of the metro line today. Coloured chesters around Hadrian's Wall. Blake, black chesters, North Shields. Green chesters, a hamlet now under Wallsend Police Station. Rudd, red chester, Vindabala Fort, heading on the wall. Wit, white chester, settlement 1 mile northwest of Rochester. Quote from John Collingwood Bruce, The Roman Wall, 1851. Blake Chester's at the high end of North Shields, is the site of another camp. Waterville, the residence of George Ripon Esquire, is within its bounds. Several carved stones, much worn by the weather, are on the ground, and many Roman building stones may be observed in the contiguous fences. Alexander Scott Park, North Shields, is the site of the Waterville estate. Before North Shields existed, this would have lay in East Churton. There are a few key sources for the existence of a Roman camp in North Shields, including the Bruce and Hodgson quotations above. The oldest source is the 1320 Tynemouth Chartelry, which provides an enigmatic description of the area, with what we believe is a firm and obvious location for the site. The other modern sources have been either debunked or seem to have been somewhat overlooked by researchers and are also worth consideration. The Chartelry text. We are thankful to Christopher Hunwick, archivist at Northumberland Estates, Alnwick Castle, for sourcing this vital manuscript and helping us greatly with our inquiry. The Tynemouth Chartelry contained all of the prior's lands, property, legal rights, liberties and privileges. In this particular 1320 document, the land of Henry Fawkes of West Backworth is delineated in order for him to grant the monks of Tynemouth Priory right of way through his land to quarry slate for roofing. Fawkes' land is described using 6 boundary points, which are shown in blue on the map. H.H.E. Craster, in his History of Northumberland, 1907, quotes the text. The translation is as follows, quote, on a part of Roadstone Moor, Monkhouse Farm, on the west side of Preston, being 60 acres and extending in length from the road from Billings Mill, Billy Mill, towards Merton, to Splittle Flat Culture in a field of Preston, and in breadth from Blakechester's Culture in a field of East Churton to North Street, Broadway, which leads from Tynemouth towards the Fawkes of Roadstone, Monkstone. End quote. Tynemouth Chartelry, Folio 80B, 29th of July, 1320. Translation, Historical Manuscripts Commission, 1948. Referenced National Register of Archives, Report 0836. The Chartelry description of the land is vague and open to some interpretation, but the important point is that Blakechester's was in a field of East Churton. The location of Spittle Flat in a field of Preston is unknown, and further research is needed here. However, Craster goes on to state what we believe is a major oversight in claiming, quote, Blakechester's has been variously located. The deed quoted above demands a site immediately north or west of Preston Colliery, the land there conveyed practically coinciding with Billy Mill Farm. No traces of it can now be discovered, though they are said to have been distinguishable in the early 19th century. End quote. In the view of the authors of this paper, East Churton cannot possibly be conflated with an area immediately north or west of Preston. Preston sits 1 mile to the north of East Churton. They were and are distinct and separate places. As well as this, the phrase contrasting the length of the land with its breadth, quote, comma, and in breadth from Blakechester's to North Street, end quote, surely refers to the entire breadth of Fawkes' land, which puts Blakechester's precisely in line with both Billy Mill and Merton. In light of this reasoning, we believe that it is because of this red herring from Craster that previous research for Blakechester's around the Preston area yielded nothing. Waterville. Several sources point directly to Waterville House as the location of Blakechester's. This semi-stately home, designed by renowned Churton-born architect John Dobson and built in 1815, was owned by the gentleman and antiquary George Ripon Esquire, 1791 to 1864. The Waterville estate was also the site of a reservoir and waterworks, of which Ripon was the proprietor. The house was destroyed by German bombing on the 30th of September 1941. Wood's 1826 map of North Shields and Tynemouth showing the Waterville estate. The house can also be found on an 1856 map of the area produced by the North Shields and Tynemouth Dock Company. The land in question spans both sides of the railway, which was built in 1847. On the north side is a structure named Old House. In later years, the site included Hilton Lodge, of which the gate pillars are still present. This area today is the playing field of St Cuthbert's Primary School. To the south is Waterville House and Reservoir, which is now Alexander Scott Park and Stanley Street West. The site of Waterville House itself is currently occupied by property, including the North Shields Spiritualist Church. Further south of that today lies residential property, which is named on the same map as Brickfield. A topographical dictionary of England comprising the several counties, cities, boroughs, corporate and market towns, parishes and townships, 7th edition, 1848, by Samuel Lewis, states, quote, Churton, a township in the parish, borough and union of Tynemouth, East Division of Castle Ward, South Division of Northumberland, 1 mile west-southwest from North Shields, containing 4,360 inhabitants. This township comprises 1,795 acres, abounding in coal, and the village, which forms the western suburb of North Shields, has greatly increased in extent and population owing chiefly to the extension of the coal works from which tramroads have been formed to the River Tyne. In the township are also iron foundries on a large scale for the manufacture of steam engines and various kinds of machinery. Waterville House, situated here, occupies the site of the Roman station of Blakechesters. End quote. While Collingwood Bruce wrote in 1851, quote, Blakechesters, at the high end of North Shields, is the site of another camp. Waterville, the residence of George Ripon, Esquire, is within its bounds. Several carved stones, much worn by the weather, are on the ground, and many Roman building stones may be observed in the contiguous fences. End quote. As well as the Roman coins found in neighbouring fields, Archaeologia Aeliana, Volume 12, 1887, contains a catalogue of Roman inscribed and sculptured stones found in the region, with the following entries. Quote, 196. Part of the shoulder of a large male statue from Blakechesters, North Shields, presented by George Ripon, Esquire. Appendix, number 33. The laureated head of Pan, of larger size than usual, thus numbered, is not from Carveran, but from Blakechesters. It was presented by Mr. George Ripon. End quote. Disappointingly, these stones have been expertly examined by the learned E.J. Phillips from the Society of Antiquaries in Newcastle and reliably found to be 18th century productions. Written out of history. There was a map published of Hadrian's Wall with Blakechesters labelled on it, and this image was used for the front cover of this paper and shared with me courtesy of Alan Jones of Whitley Bay. The map folded out from the early editions of John Collingwood Bruce's masterwork, Handbook to the Roman War, 1863, as well as in his earlier book, The Roman War, 1851. Blakechesters was given prominence because Bruce saw the site himself and wrote about the strategic importance of it. However, in later editions from 1947 onwards, this Blakechesters map entry was erased, and a great deal of detail within the book, along with much of Bruce's stylistic flourish, became sanitised by successive editors. In regards to Blakechesters, this occurred because the remains of the fort were gone by the early 20th century. Nevertheless, this crude redaction and rewriting, errors notwithstanding, is viewed by the authors of this paper as deeply problematic and excessive. More discourse on Blakechesters by J.C. Bruce. Quote, The recent discoveries at South Shields. Dr. Bruce read a paper on the recent discoveries in the Roman camp on the Law, South Shields. In the course of his remarks, he said the Great Wall of the Lower Isthmus had its eastern extremity on the north bank of the River Tyne, at the village which has taken its name from the circumstance, Wallsend. This place is about 4 miles from the junction of the river with the sea. The mouth of the Tyne was not, however, undefended. On the opposite side of the estuary, standing upon a bold elevation, we have the camp at South Shields. These two camps, we might suppose, would have been sufficient to command the entrance to the Tyne. The Romans thought otherwise. At the western extremity of North Shields, at a place called Blake Chesters, about midway between Wallsend and Tynemouth Priory, were to be seen until lately the remains of a fortlet, which it is believed to have been Roman. Then, on the south side of the river, and at about the same distance from the Law as Blake Chesters is from Tynemouth, we have the town of Jarrow, where undoubtedly the Romans had a station." End quote. Newcastle Weekly Chronicle, 3rd of the 10th, 1884. Discord between Bruce and Craster. There's a certain level of discord between the accounts of the historians H.H.E. Craster and John Collingwood Bruce. More accurately, Bruce may be described as an antiquarian, in contrast to the more academic historian Craster, who was granted full reign of the Duke of Northumberland's archives from which to write his volumes of the mammoth History of Northumberland. It does seem, by his accounts, that Craster lacked an acute first-hand knowledge of the geography of what is now the North Tyneside area. Bruce, on the other hand, was from Newcastle and was a hands-on antiquary, venturing to the more remote places he wrote about and sketching and cataloguing the artefacts he found, while employing reason and experience to speculate on the Roman occupation. Both men were brilliant and venerated scholars. However, Craster wrote 50 years later than Bruce, 1900s versus 1850s. He didn't see Blake Chesters as Bruce did, matter-of-factly before North Shields became built up. Secondly, a knotty problem has arisen in Craster's understanding of the area. This lies in the fact there are two places called Roadstone. Road or rood means cross in Old English. That are within the contiguous moor that has borne various names, including Billymill Moor, Tynemouthshire Moor, and Shire Moor. The first roadstone near Tynemouth is an Anglo-Saxon cross, an ancient boundary marker of the northern limit of the Prior's land in Tynemouth. It was the place where felons were hanged outside of church bounds and has been known since modern times as the Monkstone. The antiquarian John Brand referred to it as the Roadstone in his History of Newcastle, Volume 2, page 90, 1789. That this is the roadstone bordering Folksland in the 1320 Charterary is somewhat churlishly dismissed without explanation by Craster in the footnotes on page 413 of History of Northumberland, as it presumably doesn't fit his erroneous belief in Blake Chesters being around the Billymill area, or as he also confusingly stated, immediately north or west of Preston. The second roadstone is at Holystone in the Shire Moor area west of Merton. Craster believes this is the roadstone in the 1320 Charterary. Nota bene, North Street ran north from Tynemouth, not from Billymill. It was the boundary between the Prior's land and Folks' land, which the monks needed permission to cross for the quarrying of slate. In assessing the evidence for the location of Blake Chesters, Craster should, in the author's view, be given far less weight, A, for his uncharacteristic lack of rigour in dismissing earlier antiquaries such as John Collingwood Bruce, but also John Brand, and B, for his two fundamental errors elucidated above, that is to say, the Latin misinterpretation and the roadstone conflation. Surrounding stones. According to a report in the Newcastle Weekly Chronicle on the 26th of September 1891, local journalist and historian William Brocky wrote in The History of Shields, 1851, quote, "The present turnpike road to Newcastle passes the west side of the camp. The foundation walls have been examined very recently and are only a few inches below the level of the road." End quote. The authors have been unable to source this quote regarding this intriguing discovery of Roman stones that are presumably still below the tarmac on Coach Lane. However, thanks goes to Tyneside historian Steve Elwood for sourcing this newspaper report. The contiguous fences Bruce talks of offer another clue to the place, as there are several walls in the streets around the site that are built with small, irregular and weathered sandstone blocks, as shown in the following map. Thank you to local resident Adam Gray for helping in sourcing these sections of wall. Point 4 on the map are the walls of the old Hilton Lodge, a John Dobson designed manor house immediately north of Waterville, also a Dobson designed house, where the primary school is today, while points 5 and 6 were originally part of the gardens of the house. Note how the stones in this picture of point 4 form a distinct shape, unlike typical bricks or wall stones. Could these be Springer stones from a Roman arch to the camp? Thank you to local Roman expert Peter Christopherian Angus for identifying these stones. Position. The Blake-Chester's site is in a strategic spot and on a high point locally. This vantage point is not easy to appreciate given the level of urban development around it, but when you stand in the park or on the pedestrian bridge on Coach Lane, crossing the railway line below, you can really get a sense for why the Romans chose this place. To this end, I ask any reader to stand on this bridge and remove all the buildings in your mind's eye to consider how ideal the place is. In short, it feels Roman, just as other forts and forts speculated by Collingwood Bruce also do, due to their genius loci. Blake-Chester's would have been built within full view of Wallsend, Penbal Crag, another high point, Arbea, the supposed Roman forts at both Jarrow and where Cleedon Mill is situated, the highest point within miles, within view of both Pons Aelius and Sunderland, Dicty, on the River Wear, Vedra, as well as the supposed Roman fort of Penshaw Hill. Line of sight was vital to the Romans' ability to communicate. They didn't like blind spots in their defensive line, and the distance between the end of the wall and the sea formed a massive blind spot. Line of sight communication was also far quicker and presented less of a risk than delivering written messages. At an apex, like the forts at Wallsend and Newcastle, Blake-Chester sits at a bend in the river called Panache Point, with commanding views down two stretches, the entrance reach and the Shields Harbour reach. It also sits on Coach Lane, which appears to be a very old route and toll gate to the river, and the ferry landing, which appears to have been located there since time immemorial. There has been a ferry crossing for at least 800 years, since North Shields was founded. It's a key crossing point. In a straight line. As well as this, Blake-Chester sits at the correct interval on a line from Newcastle to Tynemouth. Upon this line sits the easternmost section of Hadrian's Wall, the fort at Wallsend, and Hadrian's Mound, halfway between Blake-Chester's and Penbal Crag. Mile Castles 2 and 3, Segedunum Fort, and the Blake-Chester's site sit perpendicular to this line, which follows an east-northeasterly course. This line more or less follows the route of the railway. The excavation of this line and natural ridge through North Shields by the Victorians may have removed some Roman archaeology. Water. The clue's in the name, Waterville. The Romans relied on streams beside their camps, and Blake-Chester's has an ample water supply. A reservoir is marked across the road in the 1856 Tynemouth dock map, and the Spring Gardens district lies at the top of the road, also indicating a freshwater source. Shape and area. As stated before, the site and situation of Blake-Chester's feels Roman. It is also flat and the correct shape and area for a Roman fort. Miraculously, this patch of land was left free from building. Maybe the reason for this is that Alexander Scott, a local councillor and physician whom the park is named after, knew it was Roman. Perhaps he also knew George Ripon. Leading light. The modern-day high light and low light are two of the main features of North Shields Harbour. When these two white towers line up on entering the river, they provide a guide for ships to avoid the Black Middens, and before the groin was built, to steer clear of the Herd Sands on the south side. Navigation transits like this are common in the world's waterways and likely to have their origin in the ancient world. In Roman times, with Blake-Chester's being on a high point locally, a beacon would have served an important purpose for ships a good distance away, being in line with both a speculated signal station on the site of Clifford's Fort and the middle of the old channel. For further context, please read this detailed post, A Roman Pharos at North Shields. Roman signalling stations have been unearthed down the coast at Scarborough Castle and Whitby, which share similar geography and history with Penball Crag. These belong to a relay of beacons along the Yorkshire coast. There were dozens of other Roman signalling stations on high points across Britain. Below is an excellent artist's impression of the Scarborough Station by Ivan Lapa, which represents a pharos structure not unlike the preserved pharos at Dover. Adrian's Mound. Heading towards Tynemouth from the direction of Waterville is sited the large ballast embankment that culverts the south side of Northumberland Park and the north side of Tanner's Bank, along which runs the Tynemouth Road and the railway line. A few sources refer to the western side of this area prior to the embankment as Adrian's Mound, since a 19th century excavation discovered what was speculated to be Roman remains, hence the name. In addition, it is the site of the milestone, marking the 8-mile point east of Newcastle. This may also be the site of an ancient toll gate. Local context. If we put these points together with a map of the Roman finds we know about in the immediate region, as well as the ones that have been speculated about, we can construct the following map pinpointing Blake Chesters. Future research. There are still some key questions need answering. 1. We need to research the record of Roman coins found at Waterville, in the neighbouring fields and over the wider area. We then need to add these to the map to build up a fuller picture of the Roman presence in the area. 2. The site of the former Churton House and the present site of Norham School, both to the west of Alexander Scott Park, need investigation as possible outposts or Romano-British farmsteads. Were coins found in the fields surrounding these places? As well as this, the site of Greenchesters, now below Wallsend Police Station, requires investigation. 3. The authors need to examine the thesis, research and reasoning on which the previous investigations and dig were conducted to find Blake Chesters at Preston and around Camp Terrace in North Shields. 4. Spittal Flat is mentioned in the 1320 Chartelry and a document from 1649. This needs to be researched. 5. Each of the sources for Adrian's Mound on the Tyne and Wear archive site needs to be investigated. 6. There is a curious reference to recent discoveries at both Alexander Scott Park and Camp Terrace in a school book titled A Tynemouth School Looks Around. This was published in 1949 by the Tynemouth County Borough Education Committee and was written and compiled at Ralph Gardner School to mark the centenary of the borough. Frustratingly, it is assumed the reader is aware of these finds and that they are not elaborated on or referenced. We would need to search newspapers from the 1940s to uncover these finds. These questions aside, the existence of a Roman camp in North Shields called Blake Chesters has multiple references. Although the location has yet to be confirmed, and some of the statements made in this paper may be speculative, the authors believe the convergence of evidence towards the site of Waterville House is worthy of archaeological investigation.